Thank you. Wow. I've been sitting here this morning, and tell me if I'm wrong, but has God showed up here today or what? As we go through the day, and it seems like you hear speaker after speaker, you see hope in their heart, but as we are conveying our messages, it is very clear that our nation is moving very quickly to a very dark place. I want to begin, before I take you to maybe some even darker times, with a message of hope. As you hear us all talk today, and as you equip yourselves to engage the culture for the glory of our God, know that you serve a living God, and He is sitting on the throne. And so, the Supreme Court can do a lot of things. But as I read after that horrible opinion a few weeks ago, somebody pointed out, you will never put Jesus back in the grave. It's important to realize why we're here. I don't know who put the cross in the middle, but the centrality of the cross is why we are all here today. Yes, we are going to talk about the Constitution. We're going to talk about good governance, and I'm going to do it very fast because we're going to do about a 40-week course in 30 minutes here. So put your seatbelts on. But as we go through, and as we hear about good governance and the rule of law and these concepts that are so important to the future of our nation, understand that is why we are here. We want to preserve environments where the good news of Jesus can be shared, and where we can make disciples of all nations. And that Supreme Court opinion that came down recently did much more than legalize or create a right of same-sex marriage. And that's something we need to understand very clearly, because the Bible says we're supposed to be what? We're supposed to be able to give a hope for the reason that we have. And so we need to understand what the situation is so that we can properly respond in our own areas of influence, so that we can bring this country back to a place that is God-honored. And if we begin with that notion, that means we got to go back to school, we got to do a little bit of homework. And what I'm going to do today in the time that I have is I'm going to show you how we got here. But just so you know, here is a lot uglier than how it's been reported. Here is not same-sex marriage being legalized. That decision, and the Lord's given me very few talents. Don't ask me to change a tire. He's given me very, very few talents. But one of the things He gave me is He gave me the ability to read constitutional opinions. We represented 125,000 African American ministries in the Supreme Court marriage case. And what we said was going to happen, I'm afraid, has happened. I've been talking for 10 years on these issues, and 10 years ago when we were representing Christians around the world, where a pastor speaking from a pulpit about this size to a congregation very much smaller than this room was put in prison, in jail, for reading from the Holy Bible. And no, that was not in a Sharia-controlled country. That was in the democratic country of Sweden. Now, if you wonder if that's where we're going, yeah, it is. And if you're wondering if that decision created the foundation and built the infrastructure for religious conscience to be dismantled and freedom of expression, especially religious expression, be dismantled in this country, yes, it did. But remember, we serve a living God. And if you wonder if that living God has a sense of humor, I'm just going to give you a little bit of example of that Sweden case. When we took that case to the Supreme Court in Sweden, and ultimately went to the Supreme Court in Sweden, The entire country all of a sudden was watching. Parliament shut down so that they could go hear it. The entire media, it was put on, the Supreme Court proceedings were being broadcast on national media in Sweden. And the Supreme Court, after reading all the documents and all the legal arguments, looked over the lawyers and said, well, you know what, before we decide this case, even though we have heard all the legal arguments about religious conscience, we actually need to hear the message that the pastor gave. And so this message from Romans that this local prosecutor thought was so dangerous for a 70-year-old gray-haired pastor to give to 20 parishioners, that message of Christ and love and truth was then broadcast live to the nation of Sweden. We do serve a living God, and He has a sense of humor sometimes. But would that same case be resolved the same way as it was, as the Supreme Court said, what are you doing, government? That pastor has religious freedom. He has a right to religious conscience, a liberty of conscience. He has a right to free expression. And that pastor was freed from prison and was able to continue to preach truth in the Word. What happened? How did we get to where we are today, which is exactly where that pastor was in that during that prosecution about 10 years ago? Well, you've heard different people talking about how our country had Christian foundations. Well, what that meant, in a lot of ways, is that when people govern, whether they worked in this building or this building or this building, they governed through a particular lens, a worldview lens, that was a truthful lens, a Judeo-Christian worldview. And so they saw governance through a Judeo-Christian worldview. And we separate power, for example. Why do we separate power in this nation? Why do we have 3 branches of government up here? Because in Isaiah, we talked about what? That there's the king, and then there's the judge, and there's the lawmaker. And so our founders understood that we were not all born good, just like the left is trying to suggest that we are. They understood that we were born bad, and if you give all the power to one person or one branch of government, given our sinful nature and our nature to not always act in the best interest in interest of goodness, our founders knew what would happen. And I illustrate that to my classes sometimes because they all, 80%, 90% raise their hand and say, oh, we're all born good in this country. That's where we come from, this nation. And then I find someone who didn't, and sure enough, they are a parent, and they try to explain it to the rest of the class, that we're not all born good. If this microphone is a rattle, and you give the rattle to a baby, this will illustrate that we're not born good. The baby will play with the rattle. Now the rattle's going to represent power when these babies grow up and work in these buildings over here. But the baby has a rattle. You introduce a second baby to the scenario. A baby walks over and says, can I play with the rattle too? Can I share in the fun? The first baby's going to say what? Oh yes, I'm born good. I want to share with you. Here it is. No, the baby's going to say, no, it's mine. Well, again, those babies that are fighting over the rattle grow up, and some of them work in this building, ladies and gentlemen. Some of them work in this building, and some of them work in this building over here. And our founders understood that sinful nature of man and said, we're going to divide the power. We're not going to let any one person be able to have all the power in this nation. Well, the second thing they did when they wrote this Constitution here is they not only divided power, but they enshrined that declaration, those liberties in the Declaration, they enshrined it in our Constitution. And if you walk away with anything today, walk away with the knowledge and be equipped to engage the culture with the truth that those liberties are limitations on the exercise of government power. Let me say that again. Your freedom of conscience, your freedom of speech, your right to due process. These are limitations on the exercise of government power. And why is that? Well, as some of our previous speakers have talked about, is because these liberties come from God. Now, there's another worldview out there. Another lens, so to speak. And the other side, including those five lawyers on the Supreme Court that wrote that opinion, they would like you to see the world through their lens. A lens that says God does not exist, and all your liberty comes from man, from us. And if government is the one who is the creator and the giver of your liberties, who can take them away? And that's exactly what happened. The way it's supposed to work, and this is going to be the Constitution here, folks. We've got the Congress, we've got the executive branch over at the White House, and over here we've got the Supreme Court, our three branches of government. And our Constitution, the blueprint for this government, designed it that way. Now, the way it's supposed to work, though, folks, before anybody in this building here, or that building over there, or this building over here, can exercise any power at all, they have to go to what? A power source. So for the rest of this talk, this plug, this power cord is going to represent power. This light or lamp is going to represent the exercise of government power. Before government, Congress, before the President, before the Supreme Court, before they can act, where do they got to go? They've got to go to a power source. And they have to plug into a power source. And if they've properly plugged into a power source, the light goes on, and hey, you've operated within the Constitution and within the scope of your power, it works. If you go beyond the scope of your power, though, like putting on a hairdryer and a toaster and the microwave at the same time, you've gone beyond the scope of your powers? No, unconstitutional. The Affordable Care Act, we'll use that as an example, now popularly known and affectionately known by many as Obamacare. Before Congress could enact Obamacare, they had to go to a power source. Why? Because enacting a law is the exercise of government power. You were told in a previous talk that there's only limited few plugs here for government to go into. And so Congress had to find some place. Did they find a place? Well, you were told that in the Constitution, Congress can regulate commerce among the states. And medical care must be commerce among the states. So everybody told you that is what Congress was using. Why? Because we are heading toward an election. And the only other possible power source that Congress could have used there was the taxing power. And if Congress was using the taxing power, that would mean they're imposing the largest tax in the history of the United States on the American public just before an election. So that is why you saw people in the executive branch get up and say, this is not a tax. That's not, no, this is commerce. Well, the law got enacted, and now the way it works is after the law gets enacted, it gets challenged, and it comes over to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court reviewed the law and said, no, it's unconstitutional if you're using the commerce power. How many people read that in the newspaper? That Congress found the law unconstitutional violation of the Commerce Clause, if that's what you're using. But then the President sent his lawyer, and the President's lawyer, the Supreme Court's known as the Solicitor General. Solicitor General came over to court and said, Your Honor, if you don't like the commerce power, how about the taxing power? It's the power to tax. And the Supreme Court, in a five justices degree, said, yes, that is a tax. And so Congress, therefore, you plugged into a proper power source, and it's constitutional. The second thing that's supposed to happen under our system is even if you have plugged into a proper power source, and you are a government official using power based on that power source, that exercise of power can never be used in a way that interferes with one of your fundamental liberties. Your freedom of speech, your free exercise of religious conscience, your due process. And so the next question, I'm going to continue with the Affordable Care Act as an illustration. The next question then is what? Well, does the Affordable Care Act, is it unconstitutional if folks in this building now try to say that under that act, all pastors and all churches and all Christian organizations must pay for killing babies, abortion? And that's the next thing that goes on. Now, what happened, folks, and how we got here, is the court a number of years ago stopped looking through this worldview lens, a lens through which David Barton and our other speakers have gotten up and very eloquently told you this is how our government was truly founded. And they've replaced it with man's own lens. It says, no, we get to say what your liberty is, and we get to take it away. Why is that important? It's important because if government decides that it is the decider, and that it holds the highest final call, ugly things happen, and ugly things have always happened when government does that. Millions and billions of people have been killed, tortured, and raped and murdered under government authority, where government is allowed to shift that approach to government. I held the privilege of serving in all three of these branches of government. Before I was able to exercise power as a federal judge, I had put my hand on the Holy Bible, raised my other hand toward heaven, and promised to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. Why do we do that? Every member of Congress is supposed to takes that same oath. Every person that holds the office of president has to take that same oath. If you ask them why they take that oath, what do you think they tell you? Well, it's to remind me that God is the highest power and that I'm supposed to act accordingly. No, they're not going to tell you that. They're going to say tradition. They may not know, they won't know the answer. We need to remind them of why they take that oath. And maybe they won't be so quick to exchange truth for a lie. Because the way it's supposed to is that when government interferes with your religious conscience, or when government interferes with your speech, what used to happen was that law would be put under the microscope. The Supreme Court would bring out a special microscope, and they would put that law under the microscope because the exercise of government power was interfering with your fundamental rights. And if government couldn't meet the highest standard possible in the law, and I won't get to legalese for you, but if the government couldn't come forward with the most compelling the law would get struck down and it would be considered unconstitutional. So how did we get from there to a place where the Supreme Court is telling you what your liberty is going to be and what your liberty is not going to be? It started out, well, let's look at the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause says that government, we shall not establish a religion, all right? Congress is not allowed to establish any official religion. Right there in the First Amendment. Very different than the Islamic Establishment Clauses that you heard David Martin speaking about earlier. If you go and look at the Establishment Clause of Syria, Saudi Arabia, look at some of these Islamic states, they have an Establishment Clause too, except instead of saying that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, it says the government officially establishes Islam as the official religion of this state, and all legislation must be consistent with the Sharia. That's a very different kind of establishment clause that we have in this nation. The idea was that government doesn't get to have an official religion. That way, along with the Free Exercise Clause, which is the rest of the First Amendment that says, Congress shall not make a law that interferes with your free exercise of religious conscience. Take those two things together and it's genius. Government doesn't get to establish an official religion or any particular sect of Christianity and force it on everybody else. At the same time, government must stay away from your church and not mess with you at all and allow your free exercise of religious conscience. As written and as originally understood, it made sense and it was genius. It provided for freedom like we've never had and probably never will have again. Now what happened was, though, you got a bunch of justices on the court that exchanged the truth for a lie, started looking at the world through a different worldview lens, and said, well, maybe that those words that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, maybe it means something else. Maybe it means, you know what, we're going to say that it means something else. We're going to say that it means that government has to have a secular reason for everything it does. And that became the law of the land. Let me tell you what that does. Imagine you are, I see some state legislators. Imagine your constituent comes into your office and says, you know, I'm a physician. What's all this talk about physician-assisted suicide? You know, that's gonna hurt our reputation of our profession. I take a Hippocratic oath. The Hippocratic oath says that, you know, that I can't engage in abortions or assisted suicides. So will you please pass a law making it against the law for physicians to assist in suicide killings? And so the legislature said, that's a good idea. We'll protect the reputation of the medical profession, and they enact the law. Now suppose legislator in a different state has a different constituent come in, and this constituent says, what's all this talk about physician-assisted suicide? In the beginning, God created man and woman. And he says that he made us in his very image. And he said that I've designed you for a purpose, to prosper you, and to, I mean, you've got a purpose in life. And because I made you in my image, and because I've created you, your life has inherent value, so much inherent value that thou shalt not kill. And so because life has sacred value, Madam Legislature, will you please enact a law that prohibits physicians from assisting in the killing of the babies? Or in assisted suicide. And so the legislator said, sure. And at the same time, he writes it in exactly the same way as his legislator in the other state. We've got two laws prohibiting physician-assisted suicide, written identically, word for word. They both go to the Supreme Court. The first one gets upheld under the Establishment Clause because it had a secular reason for the law. And the second one gets struck down because it was informed by a sacred purpose. And we let it happen. Once the court was allowed to exchange the truth of our Lord for a lie, how much easier was it for them, do you think, to continue to decide what liberty you're going to have and what liberty you're not going to have? And so the way it started, folks, is that there was a contraceptive case, and they said, well, there's a right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment, at least, and there may be a small bit of privacy in that Fourth Amendment because we don't want law enforcement knocking down our bedroom doors and coming into our house, and so that's what they relied upon. But then, in a very Darwinistic way, where you're thinking Big Bang and let's evolve, and that's where we get the living Constitution, by the way. We're going to get this living Constitution. Let's start to evolve this idea. Next contraception case says, well, you know, that right to privacy, that's not really grounded in real privacy. That's grounded in personal autonomy. That's grounded in I get to do whatever feels good and whatever is good for me. Exchange the truth from a lie right there. The Big Bang has just happened. Now watch the evolution. Because these are the same cases all the way through. And go read the cases if you don't believe me. They literally cut and pasted the holdings and the reasoning from each one of these cases as they evolved into the next one. Abortion, that's kind of like contraception. So let's now evolve this new concept of privacy to include abortion. What has the court just done here? Government properly can regulate conduct. Government's supposed to protect us and supposed to protect our life and our liberty. And so government can regulate against conduct that interferes with our safety, right? And government can always regulate, therefore, conduct on the basis of safety, for example, or health or morality. And so that's what we did. We had all these states of America, almost 47 states, I believe, at the time, that had regulated the unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct of killing a baby, killing an unborn baby, and made it illegal. Supreme Court came in and said, no, we're evolving this new liberty that we created, and we're going to include abortion. So what did they do? Listen very carefully. They took conduct, unhealthy, dangerous conduct that they wanted to engage in, and they recharacterized it as liberty. Because unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct government can regulate. Liberty is what? Liberty is a limit and stops government power. Very tricky if you're the other side, isn't it? They took unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct and they recharacterized it and called it liberty. So if you want to engage in unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct in this country that government is stopping you from doing, what do? Go find some lawyer wearing a robe that'll call it liberty. And that's what they did with abortion. And then, because we're going to keep this Darwinistic idea of the evolving living constitution, next case that comes in front is a partial birth abortion case. Government had used its power to stop a partial birth abortion. Again, regulating unhealthy, dangerous, or immoral conduct. Nope, abortion, that's kind of like abortion. Partial birth abortion, that's kind of like abortion, that's kind of like contraception. Oh, that fundamental right of personal autonomy trumps. We now have a new liberty. Government, we're going to stop you from regulating that kind of conduct, unless you do it in a very different way. Next case was sodomy. Government was regulating against unhealthy, dangerous, and immoral conduct of engaging in sodomy. Court said, well, that's kind of like sexual conduct, like the other, like abortion, and that's like sexual autonomy. So let's evolve now our new liberty to include sodomy. But don't worry, America, we'll never extend that to making unions like marriage, same-sex unions. Don't worry about that. Anytime you see the court say, don't worry about that, we're not doing this, you better start to worry, because that's the next thing on their radar. And so, it wasn't prophecy, but for years I said, this is what the court is going to do. They're going to create this new fundamental right of same-sex marriage. And all they did is evolve it. It's not prophecy. It's not any seventh grader that's being homeschooled and being taught critically thinking skills can take that premise and see and logically see where that court decision was going to go to. Now, since I'm running out of time, you need to understand that that's not just what the court did. The court also said, don't worry, religious folks. You've got religious liberty, and you can still teach and stuff. You know what they didn't say? They didn't say that you've got the First Amendment protection anymore. They didn't say that you can exercise that liberty. Well, a lot of good your liberty is for religious conscience and speech if you're not allowed to exercise it. And so we've got about 12 to 18 months, I believe, for the church to respond. We need millions of church-going people to stand up and say, you've crossed a line in the sand. We've got tens of thousands of Christians every day dying and being impaled on stakes for their faith. Will you do nothing less to stand up as your freedom is going to be taken from you? If we don't respond in the next 12 to 15 months, you heard it here first, write it down this time and date. For the next 15 years, you're going to watch Christians lose their religious liberty. First, they're going to take away the right of government workers like that clerk. Then you're going to see people that are licensed. How many people in here are licensed? For whatever profession you do. Guess what? The license means that the government has your prosperity and your ability to make a living in their hands. And right now, I happen to be a lawyer. All over the country, they're looking at the licenses of lawyers, and they're saying, you've got to comply with the following conduct. And they're trying to add this provision. You cannot speak in any such a way that's going to reflect bias against sexual orientation. There we go. They're going to take the license away. They're going to take away our ability to earn a living. Yeah, they may try and take away your 501c3, but big deal. You know what? I know if they do that to the Christian body, I can tell you that the plate is going to be, the offering is going to be twice as big next week. But that's not where they're going to stop. And then they will begin to tax your property. And they eventually can. You know, the good news is we're probably not going to get impaled. We're probably not going to get drawn and quartered. The bad news is some of us are going to go to jail. Some of us are going to go to prison. Unless we get up and stand. Now, there was a guy in, somebody mentioned Bonhoeffer earlier today. There's a guy that was in prison with Bonhoeffer. And this was during the Nazi regime, and they were about to be killed. And the guy said, you know, when they came for the trade unionists, I didn't stand up and say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist. I want you to be thinking, when they came for the clerk in Kentucky, I didn't stand up and say anything because I wasn't a court clerk. When they came for the socialists, I didn't stand up and say anything because I wasn't a socialist. When they came for the gypsies, I didn't stand up because I wasn't a gypsy. When they came for the Jews, I didn't stand up and say anything because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me. There was no one left to say. We serve a living God. You're going to hear in the next number of months opportunities to mobilize, where we will have millions of Christians marching to Washington and on the state legislatures. I pray that you will stand now, because if you don't, we will lose our liberty within 15 years, and for the next 100 years, we won't get it back. There are other things that you can do. If you are a church or if you are a Christian organization, one of the things you immediately should begin to do is review your bylaws. And we've got, there's national organizations that have put out good templates. We here in Michigan are looking at some of the best out there and putting together some templates for you as well. But you need to look at your bylaws, you need to look at your statement of faith, you need to look at your membership policy, you need to look at, if you have a facility like this, you need a facility use policy. The government and the other side has 100 different ways to come at you, and you need to prepare yourself for that and to inoculate yourself against that. I can tell you it's going to happen because I've defended these cases all over the world, and everything is the same pattern, and we're just a few years behind Europe and behind Canada. So get those things done. Come to our website, Salt Lake Global or the Great Lakes Justice Center. We've got materials from you from national organizations that have put stuff together. We've got our own things that we're putting together. Do that, first of all, to protect yourself. Second of all, understand that there's a lot of power that Congress has. We can respond. This is not a done deal, and the press is trying to make it sound like a done deal, but there are people all over the country that are working very hard because we know it's not. Congress, for example, has the power under this Constitution. Remember power sources? One of the powers that Congress has is to decide what the federal courts in the United States will be. Congress tomorrow can eliminate the entire federal judiciary except for the Supreme Court, and they can make the Supreme Court one justice if they wanted to. I'm not sure all your members of Congress even know they have that power. It's called the Exceptions Clause. Congress has the power of the purse, which means they can tax you, and then they take that tax and they spend money. Well, guess what? Every paper clip, every desk, every piece of paper that those opinions are written on come from appropriations in Congress, and every appropriation comes from and must, under the Constitution, start in the House, who's controlled by Republicans. So don't anybody complain about Obama being behind all this, because tomorrow, if Congress wanted to, Justice Roberts could be the entire federal judiciary, and him and his desk is all that could be left. Congress has the power under the Tax and Spending Clause to decide what is going to be appropriated and what is spent. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the best policy of controlling policy, but we live in desperate times. But you've got the Exceptions Clause, you've got the tax and spending powers, you have the big hammer. The House of Representatives has the power in the Constitution to impeach a justice of the Supreme Court, and the Senate under the Constitution has the power to try that impeachment and remove that justice from the Supreme Court. Now, if you wonder whether the Supreme Court had authority to enter that opinion, read the dissenting justices. The governors of the state, all 50 states, can do the same thing they did when the Supreme Court handed down another illegitimate opinion. When the Supreme Court handed down Dred Scott, which said that all African Americans were not people worthy of constitutional protection. The state of Wisconsin said, you have no legitimate authority under the Constitution to enter an opinion like that, and we shall not enforce it. The Supreme Court did an unprecedented thing in the Obergefell case, in the marriage case. It lacked authority to do what it did. Read the dissenting, because I'm out of time here, read the dissenting opinions, which outlines it very clearly, and then get to your governor and get to your state attorney general and say, look, it's time for you to uphold the Constitution, because the state attorney general and the state governor and the lieutenant governor, they also put their hand on the Bible and put their other hand toward heaven and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign presence, so help me God, as well as the state Constitution. Well, I'm out of time, so I'm going to challenge you to be light in the darkness. Follow up on some of these things I mentioned about, especially the opportunities that you will have at the grassroots level to get involved and to stand up for truth and to be light in the darkness. It's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. We don't chase the elephant. We don't chase the donkey. We're chasing the lamb. And so I want to challenge you to know that you serve a living God. Know that that living God has called you to be salt and light in this world. Know that we are not living in Caesar's time where the government, where you render unto Caesar, and unto God what is God's. We're not living in a time where Caesar, representing government, is a dictatorship. Caesar today is who in this nation? It's you, we the people. So there is no excuse to not be participating. In fact, I think it goes against that biblical admonition if we don't participate. So be salt, be light. My prayers are with you. God bless you for coming to a place like this, and God bless you for your heart for this nation. Please check out our websites. It'll help you equip. It's all free. We're not asking for money. There's books back there. I heard we talked about Sharia earlier. I've got a book on Sharia that I wrote that I didn't bring. If you email me, I'll send you a free electronic copy. The books are free. If you have some money to throw in for donations so we can print the next bunch, so the next bunch will be free, please feel free to do so. If you can't afford it, I want you to have it. I want you to take it home, equip yourself, and know that one of our ministries at Salt Lake Global is the Great Lakes Justice Center. And that is where we are hitting the ground running. I've got our top trial lawyer back here. He'll talk to you. Right now we're representing, we're helping out with constitutions in Trinidad. We're working right here in Michigan with a woman who walked into a locker room and found a man in the locker room, and then the Planet Fitness then did what? They threw her out. They threw her out. And so if you want to stand up for truth in the legal realm, our Justice Division, speak to David Coleman back there. He'll be happy to talk to you a little bit. So be salt, be light. God bless you all. And I'm going to hang around for the panel as well, so I'll be able to answer questions.